Hi, and welcome to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Today, I want to talk about the concept of backseat drivers in your business. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Thank you for joining me. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are at. Hey, I wanted to talk about this concept a little bit, as we can probably all relate, if you're over 16 years old, of this backseat driver syndrome. And this has a lot of connotations, especially in the business world, specifically about unity of message, right? So this is kind of the core of this idea that you really... The antithesis of a backseat driver is unity of message, okay? So we've all probably, I'm assuming, we've all kind of been in that situation where we've had someone in our car, and that could be a family member, right? A spouse, it could be a mother or a father, a brother or sister, a younger sibling, anything of those natures where, we're cruising down the road and everyone's got kind of their own style of driving, right? How they hold the steering wheel, how they, work the pedals or the clutch, whatever that may be, how they like the radio or their mirrors are set, all those types of things, right? There's a kind of an overarching standard, right, that we're all tested to by your local DMV, but then we develop our own styles of how we do it, how far we lean back, all those types of things, how we interact in the roadways, how aggressive we are, how defensive we are, all those things. And we each kind of have our own take on that, of what it means to be a quote-unquote good driver. And as we go through these, just through life and having passengers in our vehicles and being passengers in other people's vehicles, we judge their driving, and we are judged our driving by their own experiences, right? And how, it's in comparison. My wife and I certainly go through this a lot. There was many years, and this actually kind of became a little bit of a contention issue with us of, really me not liking the way she was driving. I didn't think she was alert enough, all those types of things. We won't get into it, but it caused actually a fair amount of strife and several, dare I say, arguments over the years as we were trying to come to terms of what each of us determined or interpreted to be a quote unquote, again, good driver. So we were backseat drivers to each other. Me certainly more than she was, me to her more than she was to me. But we all have this concept of, hey, we're trucking down the road. We've got our own way of, maybe it's even directions, right? Our own way of getting to some place, especially if you've been there repeatedly, like, oh, I want to take the freeway. No, I want to take back roads, all those types of things. And that's in conflict with the person next to us. And they voice that opinion, right? They say, oh, you're not doing it right. You should be doing this. Or, oh, take a left up here. All those types of things that are various inputs to us, and they may be valid, right? They could be completely, based on the way they do things, they could be completely valid ways to drive or get to someplace. But they're in conflict with your way of doing it. They're in conflict with what your intention is and your goals, and it creates that strife. And so ultimately, like I said, this is all about mixed messages. And how this applies in business, kind of the analogy here is, if you are beyond, so I'm talking a little bit to people that lead in teams, okay? So maybe you've got, you're the business owner, you develop this business and you've hired on a CEO or a CFO or a COO, or even just have a business partner, or maybe it's you and your wife, or your, you and your partner, your brother, your dad, your mom, an uncle, some other partner where you kind of share that leadership responsibility in your business. And then, of course, this is, again, assuming that you've got employees that work for you. But, it's two personalities or three or four. It could be a whole slew of personalities. But what I want to encourage you and talk to you about tonight is that unity of effort, right? So you hopefully, as part of maybe listening to this podcast, or we've had a chance to interact with you on the coaching side, you've developed, or you're starting to develop, a business company culture, okay? Again, this is beyond just you being the single figurehead and responsible for building this and enforcing it. But as this team, we're kind of going to go on the basic, maybe a two-person team or a husband and wife. Or a business partner kind of relationship, two high school friends that decided to go into business together, whatever that is. But as you're building this culture, you build this culture, right? You're building a culture, hopefully purposefully, and not just something you're falling into, but you're being very purposeful about it, of what kind of business you want to run and the type of employees you have and all those things. And there can be a disconnect between those two leaders. Maybe you're fairly equal in your leadership roles and responsibilities and duties, and maybe there's a slight subordination, one to another. But ultimately, as far as your employees and your workforce views it, you're both kind of leaders in the company. Okay, so this would be like a commander and a vice commander in the military sense, or a director of operations type of scenario. But when those 2 people or 3 people or 4 people are not in alignment themselves with each other of what the culture is, what are the goals of the business, what is the direction of the business, and they may have their own duties, right? A CEO has different duties than a CFO, right? The financial officer has different duties than the operations officer, has different duties than the CMO, the marketing officer, all those things. They have different duties, but ultimately they all have a responsibility to the organization to create that unified message of, again, culture, goals, core values, a mission statement, whatever that is for your company, and to enforce those goals and to project those goals as part of that overall to the employees and to the workforce. So when the disconnect comes and when that backseat driver comes in is when those, 2, 3, 4, whatever, that leadership team is in disagreement with each other. And it may not be like actual, like active disagreement, like, hey, I think we should, move our company into Mexico. And the other guy says, no, we should move it into Canada, for whatever reasons. I'm not talking about those active disagreements. I'm talking about fundamentally as a culture that they are in disagreement with each other with how they go about encouraging that culture, developing that culture, and even enforcing the standards of that culture. Because we can all kind of think of businesses, whether by personal experience that you've had or that you've known, where they've fallen apart because of the leadership team. They've fallen apart because you get to this point where you're so disconnected as the 2 individuals or the 3 or the team in charge of that business that it becomes inseparable, and then ultimately, right, the business fails or they have to chop it up and sell it, whatever that is, and ultimately it's disintegrated in some form or fashion. But it all goes back to, one, those teams aren't in alignment. Something has gone on that maybe they never were, right? Maybe at some point, because of a strong personality, they've all kind of fallen in line with that as that de facto leader, even though they may have somewhat equal roles. One person rises as the strong personality or wherever that may be, or the original founding member of the organization, and everyone kind of goes along because that's what's always been, right? There are a slew of different reasons of why businesses disintegrate and ultimately fail, and certainly the leadership culture is one of them. But I want to focus specifically on, if you have a leadership team, how are you guys, in the general sense, how are the members of this team aligning with each other to ensure that you're providing this unified, cohesive message to your workplace? Okay, because again, we can all think of businesses that have tanked because of that or lack of that unification. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It's a saying that I heard from a mentor of mine, and I repeatedly hear it, and I want to make sure you repeatedly hear it because it is so applicable, right? When there is confusion, and what do mixed messages cause? They cause confusion in a workforce. When there's confusion, there's what? It's failure. Confusion creates failure, and mixed messages create confusion, okay? And that's what we wanted to avoid. That's part of all of what Kale Houser Leadership does as a program, is try to get you, if you are the business owner, but you and your team, if you've got multiple people on your team, especially at that leadership kind of echelon of that organization, depending on how big it is, in alignment with each other, so that you then can align your organization to your goals and visions and core values and mission statements and all those things. And one of the ways this manifests itself, maybe kind of creeps in without you realizing it. You're like, hey, happy-go-lucky, me and my business partner Sally, we've been working together for a long time. We have meetings once a week. We're totally in line with each other, and sure, she's got her own responsibilities as the CFO, and I've got my own, or COO, and I've got my own as the CEO. But ultimately, yep, we're taking this company to the moon and all this kind of stuff. So you feel that you're on this similar path to each other. But what you haven't realized is that your employees maybe have figured out that, hey, for certain things, you go ask COO Sally. But maybe for certain other things, you go ask CEO you, Jack. Whatever that may be, it's that kind of go ask your mother syndrome. Or what, as you kind of deflect things and you say, oh, well, what does Sally have to say about that? What does Jack have to say about that? And everyone kind of learns, and it becomes part of your culture, because this is something that you've accepted as a norm, is people go to different people for and I'm not talking, task-specific things by any stretch, because obviously, maybe that is outside of your realm of expertise or your designated duties to make decisions on. I'm talking about when people have kind of figured out that, oh, Sally does much better dealing with this type of problem versus Jack, even though it is also his responsibility, he really avoids that and he hates dealing with those types of things, okay? And it can create this little bit of almost subcultures within your organization to where Sally's in charge of, like, wholeheartedly, both perception and in reality, in this one sect, and people kind of disregard, even though supposedly you're creating this team. And that can come out in ways, ultimately, like, come to a head in ways that you don't anticipate, because here you are, Jack, as the CEO, not realizing that everyone's been going to Sally for these problems, and Sally's not communicating them to you, and you're happy-go-lucky. Yeah, we're totally doing fine, and all the while, and of course, in worst case scenario, Sally uses this against you, and you ultimately split that way, which we don't want to get to. But as you're building your team, and especially if you're growing, and maybe you are that solo business owner, that solopreneur, that you're like, man, I need, I've got a couple of my employees on, but now I need to hire a sales manager, or now I need to, promote a sales manager because I'm hiring more salespeople, or an operations manager of some sort. You're running a big plant or something of that nature, manufacturing anything, or you've gotten to the point like, holy smokes, I need a CFO. We're doing so much revenue, and we've got so much on our accounts receivable and payable that I cannot do it anymore, and just having a VA based out of another country isn't handling it, or even a contractor is handling it. We need an in-house dedicated full-time person, or an HR person, right? All those types of things. And as you're building that team, right? Again, we've talked about this before, of creating that culture in your organization and being purposeful of who you bring into it, especially if you're in that growth kind of stage, is eliminating those weak links. And those weak links in your leadership chain of command, and in your leadership level, that echelon, we're just going to call it at the top, that's in charge of the whole organization. That is that shared responsibility of again, culture, attitudes, enforcement of that is what I'm really wanting to talk about, and reinforce in your brain and get you thinking about of how is, maybe they're my co-leader, my brother, my dad, whatever that case, my spouse, like, how are they sending mixed messages? Or are they sending mixed messages? As you're speaking, like, hey, I heard you talking to employee Rick over there, and you were saying, XYZ, whatever that is for that situation. And like, I don't know that is in line with what you and I had agreed was, the direction of our company. And then you need to have that discussion, because ultimately you're creating this disconnect, and your employees, your workforce certainly sees it, especially as it goes on, and inevitably it will get more severe in its divergence versus like fixing itself, if that makes sense. So that was something I'd thought about, just that whole backseat driver concept of, somebody chirping over your shoulder like, no, I want to go this way, or you're doing this wrong, right? And it doesn't, in business, it isn't always that direct. It isn't always that obvious. And you really need to be conscious about this, because just like anything else in a culture, if you're not aware of it and constantly on top of it, even at the upper echelons, who you think is on your team, who you think you're on the same page, because again, right, we're all humans. We all have our own agendas. We all have our own desires and goals and hurts and feelings and emotions, all those things that come into play, and they can change at any given moment based on some external input that we weren't even expecting, right? So moral of the story, be purposeful on your culture, be purposeful on who is on your leadership team, be purposeful on building that commitment together to move your organization forward to, whatever is based on your core values and goals and mission statement and vision statement. And then just make sure you stay on the same team and your same team, and you're providing that unified message to your workforce. All right. I hope you found this at least thought-provoking, and how this may be creeping into your organization if it applies. Like I said, if you have a team that you would consider your leadership team, of whether it be managers or upper echelon C-suite type of people. Feel free to drop me a line anytime, Kale@KaleHouserLeadership.com. Thank you so much for listening today or watching on YouTube. I really appreciate it. Have a fantastic afternoon, no matter where you're at in the world. Bye.